I used to think I was one of the lucky ones. That sounds strange, I know, because I'm talking about divorce, and there's nothing lucky about divorce. But for a long time, I genuinely believed that what happened between Michael and me was different, cleaner, more grown up than most. We didn't fight in parking lots. We didn't send angry texts at 2 in the morning. We didn't use our kids as messengers or weapons. We sat down at the kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, the same kitchen table where we'd had 1,000 breakfasts together, and we talked like two adults who respected each other. And when it was over, we shook hands. We actually shook hands, like it was a business meeting. I was proud of that for a long time, maybe too proud. The phone call came on a Tuesday in October. I remember because I had just gotten home from work, and I was still in my coat, standing in the hallway, going through the mail. Nothing but bills and a coupon for a pizza place I never ordered from. And then my phone buzzed. It was my daughter, Emily. She said, "Mom, can you talk for a second?" That's how you know it's something. Not, "Hey, Mom," not, "What are you doing later?" It's, "Can you talk for a second?" Like she needed to check the temperature of the room before she walked in. I said yes. I put down the mail and sat on the little bench by the door where we used to make the kids sit to put on their shoes. I had no idea that in about 90 seconds, something I thought I had already finished grieving would crack open again, like a wound that never quite healed all the way through. I need to tell you about Michael first. We met in college, but we didn't really notice each other until we were both 25 and working in the same city. He was in insurance. I was just starting out in school administration. We dated for 3 years, got married when we were 28. We had Emily 2 years later, and Josh 2 years after that. We bought a house in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. Michael coached Josh's Little League team for 4 years. I ran the book fair at school every fall. We got a dog named Chester, who chewed through 2 couches and 1 corner of the kitchen floor before he finally calmed down. It was a good life. I want to be clear about that. It was genuinely good. But somewhere in our early 40s, something shifted. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way water damage happens inside a wall, quietly, invisibly, until one day you press your hand against it and feel that the whole thing has gone soft. We stopped talking about anything real. We were polite to each other. We were considerate. We asked how each other's days went and gave answers that were true, but not honest. I don't think either of us was a bad person. I really don't. We just stopped being the right people for each other. Or maybe we never were, and it took 20 years to figure that out. The divorce was my idea, technically. I brought it up. Michael went quiet for about 2 minutes, and then he said, "I think you're right." And that hurt more than anything else he could have said. Because if he had argued, if he had gotten angry or cried or asked me to try again, that would have meant there was something still worth fighting for. But he just said, "I think you're right." And I knew it was over. We were 48 years old. Our kids were grown. Emily was 22 and already living in Cleveland with her boyfriend. Josh was 19 and away at college. There was no custody to fight over, no complicated schedule to work out. We sold the house, divided everything fairly, found separate apartments in the same general area so the kids would still have both of us nearby. And we told ourselves, and everyone around us, that we were handling it beautifully. People said things like, "I wish more couples could be like you." Or, "It's so mature the way you two manage things." And I nodded and smiled and felt, honestly, a little superior. Because I had done something hard, and I had done it gracefully. That's what I told myself. For the first year after the divorce, I cried sometimes at night, but I told myself that was normal. For the second year, I started building a new routine. Morning walks, longer hours at work, dinners with my friend Linda on Thursday nights. I read more books than I had in years. I found a yoga class I actually liked, which surprised me because I had always thought yoga was not really for me. And slowly, carefully, I constructed a life that felt like mine. Michael and I stayed in touch the way divorced parents do. A text here and there, a phone call when something came up with the kids. We met for coffee once or twice a year, just to stay connected, I suppose. It never felt uncomfortable. That was the thing I was most proud of. It never felt uncomfortable. I had convinced myself completely and totally that I was over him. Looking back now, I think I confused functional with healed. I think I confused not crying anymore with at peace. Those are very different things. And it took one phone call to show me exactly how different they were. So Emily said, "Can you talk for a second?" And I said yes. And she said, "I met someone." Well, not me, Dad. "I met someone Dad is seeing." I noticed she stumbled over the words a little, like she'd rehearsed them, but they still came out sideways. And I felt something in my chest, something small and quick, like a bird flying into a window. But I kept my voice steady. I was very good at keeping my voice steady. I said, "Oh, that's nice. Tell me about her." Her name was Diana. She was 46, 8 years younger than Michael. She was divorced, no kids. She lived in a town about 40 minutes away. She worked in real estate. Emily said she seemed really nice, warm, kind of quiet. They had all gone to dinner together, Michael and Diana, and Emily and her boyfriend, Ryan. Emily said it was a little awkward at first, but then it got easier. I asked the right questions. I said all the right things. "That's wonderful. I'm glad he's happy." "How did they meet? Is she good to him?" I was composed and warm and reasonable. I was exactly the person I believed myself to be. I got off the phone and sat on that little bench by the door for probably 20 minutes without moving. I didn't even take off my coat. I told myself I was just surprised. That was all. It was just the surprise of unexpected news on a Tuesday evening. It meant nothing deeper than that. Michael was a grown man, and of course he had been dating. Of course he had a life. Of course at some point he was going to meet someone. This was normal. This was healthy. This was exactly how things were supposed to go. I got up, made myself a cup of tea, and watched television for 2 hours without remembering a single thing that happened on screen. The next morning I searched for Diana on Facebook. I'm not proud of that. I want to be honest with you about the things I'm not proud of, because that's the only way this story makes any sense. I told myself I was just curious. I told myself it was natural to want to know a little about the person who was spending time with the father of my children. I told myself a lot of things while I typed her name into the search bar. I found her on the 3rd try. Her profile was mostly private, but her profile photo was visible. She was pretty. She had dark hair and a wide smile, and she was standing somewhere outdoors, somewhere with trees and sunshine, and she looked easy, like a person who laughs a lot and doesn't overthink things. I closed the app and put my phone face down on the counter. Over the next few weeks, I learned things in small doses, the way you sometimes learn things you don't actually want to know. Emily mentioned that Diana had a dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and that Michael had taken to walking the dog on weekend mornings. Josh called and said offhandedly that Dad seemed really good lately, happier than he'd been in a while. A neighbor of mine, who knew Michael through a mutual friend, mentioned that she'd seen him at the farmer's market with a woman, and that they'd looked very comfortable together. Comfortable. That word sat in my chest like a stone. Because we had been comfortable too, Michael and I. For years and years we had been comfortable. And somewhere along the way, I had started to think that comfortable meant content, when really it had just meant we'd both stopped trying. I didn't say any of this to anyone, not to Emily, not to Josh, not even to Linda, which was unusual. because Linda and I had told each other most things for the past 22 years. Instead, I carried it quietly, the way women of our generation were taught to carry things. You fold it up, you put it somewhere internal, and you keep moving. And then Michael called. It was a Saturday morning in February, cold outside, the sky that flat gray color it gets in Ohio in winter. I was making pancakes for no particular reason. Sometimes when you live alone, you make pancakes on a Saturday just to have something to do with your hands. He said, "Karen, I hope this isn't a strange thing to ask, but I wanted you to hear it from me directly. Diana and I are engaged." There was a pause, a very specific kind of pause that I think we both felt. He said they were planning a wedding for July. Small, just close family and friends. He said he hoped I would be okay with the kids being there for it, which of course I was, which of course he already knew. He said he hoped we could keep things comfortable, that word again, the way they had always been between us. I said, "Of course, Michael. I'm really happy for you." And then, because I couldn't quite stop myself, I said, "Diana sounds like a wonderful person." He thanked me. He sounded relieved. I wondered briefly if he had rehearsed the call the same way Emily had rehearsed her words back in October. Probably. We were all very careful with each other. We had been careful for years. I finished making the pancakes after we hung up. I ate them standing at the kitchen counter because somehow sitting down at the table felt like too much of a statement. And somewhere between the second and third pancake, I started to cry. Not dramatically, not the kind of crying that releases anything, just the quiet kind, the kind where your eyes fill up and overflow, and you don't even really know you're doing it until you taste salt. I stood at that counter and I cried, and I thought, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with you, Karen? You left this marriage. You were the one who sat down at that kitchen table and said the words out loud. You made this choice. You had 6 years to get used to it, 6 years to move on, 6 years to find your own happiness, and instead you are standing in your kitchen crying over pancakes because your ex-husband is getting married. But grief doesn't really care about logic. That's the thing nobody tells you. Grief makes its own schedule. I called Linda that afternoon. She came over within the hour, which is what Linda does. She showed up with a bottle of wine and a bag of those dark chocolate almonds I like, and she sat down on my couch and looked at me with her direct, no-nonsense expression that I have loved and been slightly afraid of for over 2 decades. She said, "Tell me." So I told her. All of it. The phone call from Emily, the Facebook search, the neighbor at the farmer's market, the pancakes. I told her everything in the slightly embarrassed, slightly defiant way you tell your best friend things you're ashamed of but can't hold inside anymore. And when I was done, Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Karen, you never let him go." I said, "That's not true. We've been divorced for 6 years." She said, "Being divorced and letting someone go are not the same thing." I started to argue. I listed all the evidence on my side, the yoga classes, the books, the Thursday dinners, the fact that I hadn't cried about him in years. I was building my case the way you build a case when you already know you're losing. Linda just looked at me and waited. And then, in the middle of a sentence I don't even remember starting, I stopped, because I realized she was right. Not entirely right, not right in the way that made everything simple, but right in the essential way. I had built a very convincing version of moving on. I had constructed all the right habits and routines and told all the right stories about myself to myself. But underneath it, something had remained unfinished, something I hadn't even been aware of until it was too late to deal with quietly. I hadn't been in love with Michael for years. I want to be clear about that because this story isn't about lingering romantic feelings. Not really. It was something else, something harder to name. It was the loss of the version of myself that had existed inside that marriage. The woman who had a partner, even an imperfect one. The woman who woke up next to someone. The woman whose life had a shape that included another person at its center. When Michael got engaged, it wasn't him I was grieving. It was the door closing permanently on a version of my own life. Does that make sense? Maybe it only makes sense if you've been through it. The weeks leading up to the wedding were strange. Life continued as life does. I went to work, I had dinner with Linda, I talked to Emily and Josh on the phone. On the surface, nothing was different. But inside, I was doing a kind of quiet reckoning that I hadn't done in years, maybe ever. I found myself remembering things I hadn't thought about in a long time. Not the arguments or the silences or the long, flat stretches of our marriage where nothing much happened. I remembered the good things, the specific, small, irreplaceable good things. I remembered how Michael used to hum while he was making coffee in the morning. Not a real song, just a low kind of hum, shapeless and absent, like he wasn't even aware he was doing it. I hadn't thought of that in years. I hadn't realized I had missed it. I remembered a road trip we took when the kids were small, driving down to Tennessee for a week in July, both kids asleep in the back seat, the radio playing something low, and Michael's hand on the steering wheel, and the particular quality of that summer night, and how I had thought, quietly, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. I had thought that. I had felt that. And then something changed, and we lost it, and neither of us ever found our way back. I thought about that a lot. How you can have something real and good and then lose it so slowly you don't even notice it going until it's already gone. Emily called a week before the wedding to check on me, which I appreciated more than I told her. She was careful and kind about it, which is very Emily. She said she and Ryan were going, and Josh was flying in from Denver where he was living now. She said the venue was a small inn outside the city, very simple, maybe 50 people. She said Diana's family was coming from Michigan. She said, "Are you going to be okay that day, Mom?" I said, "Of course, sweetheart. It's just a Saturday." She didn't quite believe me, I think, but she let it go. The night before the wedding, I didn't sleep well. I went to bed at 10 and was still awake at 1, which is not like me. I kept rearranging myself, turning the pillow over, listening to the house settle the way old houses do. I had bought this house 4 years after the divorce, a smaller place than the one we'd shared, but mine, in a way that house had never quite been. I had painted every room myself. I had chosen every piece of furniture. I liked this house. I needed to remember that. I had built something here. In the morning, I made coffee and got dressed, and then, without entirely planning it, I got in my car and drove. I wasn't sure where I was going at first. I just needed to be moving. I drove north out of the city, through the suburbs, past shopping centers and subdivisions, and eventually out into the flatter, quieter land beyond. And then I realized where I was heading. There's a lake about an hour outside Columbus. I don't want to give it a name because that's not the point. It's not a famous lake, not a tourist destination. It's just a lake. But Michael and I had gone there on our honeymoon 26 years ago. We'd rented a small cabin and spent a week doing very little, swimming in the mornings, sitting on the porch in the evenings, just being together in the way that new married people are together when they still believe they know exactly how everything is going to go. I hadn't been back since. I hadn't gone there on purpose today, not consciously, but there I was, pulling off the main road onto the smaller road that wound down toward the water. I parked, and walked down to the edge of the lake. It looked smaller than I remembered. That's always how it is, isn't it? The places that were enormous in your memory turn out to be ordinary-sized in real life. The water was still and gray-green, and the trees on the far side had gone red and gold because it was October now, and it was beautiful in the way that ordinary places are beautiful when you're paying attention. I sat down on a bench near the edge of the water. There were a few other people around, a man walking a dog, 2 women about my age having a conversation, a little boy throwing rocks into the water with the complete, focused commitment that only small children bring to throwing rocks. I watched him for a while. I thought about Michael and Diana standing in a small inn outside the city, probably right at this moment, probably saying their vows in front of 50 people who loved them. I thought about Emily and Josh in their good clothes, watching their father get married. I thought about what it meant for things to really end, not just on paper, not just in the practical arrangements of who takes the couch and who takes the coffee maker, but truly and completely end. I thought about the letter. I had been thinking about writing it for weeks since Linda's visit, but I hadn't let myself start it. But sitting there by the lake, something shifted. Not dramatically. There was no moment of revelation, no sudden clarity, just a very quiet, very simple sense that it was time. That evening I sat at my kitchen table, the new one, the one I had chosen myself, the one that had no history except my own, and I wrote. I wrote to Michael, though I had no intention of sending it. I wrote honestly, without performing composure or dignity or any of the things I had been performing for 6 years. I wrote about our marriage, about the good years and the quiet unraveling, about the Sunday afternoon at the kitchen table and the way he had said, "I think you're right," and how that had broken something in me that I had never fully admitted. I wrote about the 6 years after, about building my life and believing I was healed, and how wrong I had been, not about the building, but about the healed part. I wrote about Diana, not with anger, I want to be honest about that. I wrote that I hoped she made him laugh, because Michael had always had a good laugh when he let himself use it. I wrote that I hoped they walked the dog on Saturday mornings and drove with the windows down in summer and fought sometimes, but not too hard, and always found their way back. I wrote that I was sorry, not to him, not exactly, more to the marriage itself, to that thing we had made together, which had been real even when it wasn't enough. I was sorry I hadn't known how to hold on to it, or whether holding on would have even been possible. And I was sorry that the question would always be unanswered now. And at the very end I wrote, I think I always expected you to come back. Not consciously, but somewhere underneath everything, somewhere in the part of me that I never fully examined, I think I kept a small door open. And now the door is closed. And I think I need to finally learn what it means to stand in a room with all the doors closed and feel okay. I folded the letter and held it for a while. Then I put it in the back of my desk drawer, under some old receipts and a birthday card from Josh that I'd kept because of what he'd written inside. I went to bed before 10 and slept straight through until morning. That was 7 months ago now. I want to tell you what the 7 months looked like, because I think that part matters as much as the rest. The first month was the hardest, actually. I thought the wedding day would be the bottom of it, but the bottom turned out to be the weeks after, when everything was settled and real, and there was nothing left to brace myself for. Diana was Michael's wife now. That was simply the fact. And I had to live in that fact, not work toward it or dread it, just live in it. I went back to Linda's for dinner more times than usual. I called Emily for no particular reason, just to hear her voice. I let myself be less composed than I had been for years, which sounds like a small thing, but it wasn't. One night I took the letter out of the drawer and read it again. It felt different reading it than it had felt writing it, the way your own voice sounds different on a recording. but I didn't regret writing it. It had done the thing it needed to do. In March, I signed up for a drawing class at the community center. I had no reason to, no particular interest in drawing, no expectation that I'd be good at it. I just wanted to do something with my hands on Tuesday evenings. I ended up being, as I suspected, not very good at drawing. But I met a woman named Patricia in that class who made me laugh so hard one night that I spilled a whole cup of charcoal water on my jeans, and we've had coffee 3 times since then, and I think she might become a real friend. In April, Emily told me that Diana was genuinely nice, which I think she'd been holding back from saying because she was worried about how I'd take it. She said it with this careful expression, watching me, and I said, "I'm glad, Emily, I really am." And I meant it. That was new. Josh called more often this year than any year since he moved to Denver. I don't know if he knew something was going on with me or if it was just coincidence, but his calls became one of the best parts of my week. We talked about his life, his work, a woman he was seeing named Claire, who he described with the slightly embarrassed enthusiasm of a man who is trying not to admit he's in love. I told him what was happening in my life, the drawing class, Patricia, the small renovations I was doing to the kitchen. It felt like a real relationship, not just a check-in. And then, about 2 months ago, there was a birthday party. Emily's son, my grandson, little Thomas, who is 3 years old and has Michael's same wide forehead and my mother's stubborn chin, was turning 3. Emily hosted it at her house in Cleveland, and of course everyone was there. Josh flew in from Denver, and Michael and Diana came. I won't pretend I didn't feel something when I saw them walk in together. I did. But it was smaller than I expected, and different in quality. Not the sharp, destabilizing thing it had been the previous fall. More like an ache, the kind you feel in an old injury when the weather changes. You feel it, you acknowledge it, and then you move on. Diana was exactly as Emily had described her, warm, easy with people. She laughed a lot and helped clear plates without being asked, and got down on the floor with Thomas without worrying about her clothes. I watched her with Michael, and I saw what Emily and Josh had seen. He was happy. There was something lighter about him, something less carefully managed. I was glad. I want to say that clearly because I know how easy it would be not to believe it. But standing in Emily's living room, watching my grandson try to eat his own birthday cake with both fists, watching my daughter laugh, watching my son arrive at the door with a woman who made him look like a man who was falling in love, I felt glad. Not bittersweet, not gracious despite myself. Genuinely glad. Diana came over to me at some point and introduced herself properly. She had a direct way of looking at you that I liked. She said, "Emily talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you a little." And I said, "She's talked about you too. Good things." And I meant it. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, about Thomas mostly, because Thomas is very easy to talk about. About Cleveland, where she and Michael were thinking of buying a house. About nothing that mattered very much. It was ordinary and pleasant, and when she moved away to talk to someone else, I found I was still breathing normally. I found Michael a little later, standing near the back door, watching Thomas run in wobbly circles in the yard. We stood together for a moment without saying anything, and then he said, "He's something, isn't he?" I said, "He really is." And we stood there a little longer, watching our grandson run, and it was the most uncomplicated moment we had shared in years. Maybe in the entirety of the 6 years since the divorce. No careful words, no managed emotions, no quiet performance of being fine. Just 2 people who had once loved each other, standing together, watching the evidence of that love run around in a backyard, making joyful, nonsensical noise. He said, "You seem good, Karen." I said, "I am, actually." And I meant it. Not the way I used to mean it, not the constructed, optimistic, performing version of meaning it. I meant it the way you mean it when it's simply true. I drove home from Cleveland that evening in the early dark, the highway lights starting to come on, the radio playing something I didn't know but liked. And I thought about everything, the kitchen table and the handshake, and the 6 years, and the pancakes, and the lake, and the letter in the back of my desk drawer. I thought about the story I had told myself, that I was one of the lucky ones, that I had handled everything gracefully, that I was fine and healed and complete. I had been telling that story for so long that I'd started to believe it. And in some ways, the story was true. I had done some things right. I had kept things civil. I had protected my kids as best I could. I had built a real life in that apartment, and then in this house. And the life I had built was mine in a way I was proud of. But the story was also incomplete, and the incomplete part had been living inside me, quiet and unexamined, for 6 years. The truth, the whole truth, is that healing is not a single event. You don't cry it out one night and wake up finished. You don't sign the papers and shake hands and put it behind you. It happens in layers, over years, in strange small moments you can't predict or schedule. A phone call on a Tuesday evening. A pair of profile photos visible on a screen you told yourself you weren't going to look at. A letter you'll never send. A bench by a lake where the water is gray-green and there's a little boy throwing rocks. And sometimes, 7 months after you thought the hard part was over, you stand in your daughter's backyard watching your grandson run, and something finally, quietly, settles. I'm 54 years old. I have a house I chose myself and painted myself and filled with things I actually like. I have 2 kids who call me just to talk. I have a grandson who says my name the same way he says the dog's name, with a kind of astonished ownership, like he can't quite believe I exist. I have Linda, who tells me hard things with love. I have Patricia from the drawing class, who I can't draw but who makes me laugh. I have Tuesday evenings and Thursday dinners and Saturday mornings that belong to no one but me. I have a life, a real one. Not a performance of a life, not a gracefully managed substitute, a real one. The other day I opened my desk drawer looking for a stamp, and I saw the letter. I held it for a moment, this thing I had written in the dark on a day when everything felt like it was finally and permanently closing. And then I put it back. I don't think I'll ever send it. That was never the point. But I'm glad I wrote it. I'm glad I sat down at that table, my table, in my house, and told the truth to myself, about myself, even if no one else ever reads it, even if the only thing it ever did was let me sleep. I said I thought I was one of the lucky ones. I think I still am, just not for the reasons I used to think.